So, James, there's been more turmoil in the Middle East. We saw the attacks on Iran a few weeks ago. The slaughter in Gaza has only intensified in the past few weeks. And now there has been more conflict in Syria, I believe.
Correct. We've seen a massive outbreak of sectarian violence in the Suwaida province, namely the city of Asuwaida, in which we have seen just large amounts of kind of pro-government forces essentially invading the city, which is a Druze majority city. The Druze are kind of an ethno-religious minority that exists primarily in Syria, Lebanon and Israel-Palestine as well.
James, when you say pro-government forces, you mean the Salafist jihadist government that has been put in by Turkey in the West?
I do mean the Salafist jihadist Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, al-Qaeda affiliated government that was installed over the last 14 years as a more preferable option to a secular republic.
Yes.
So I want to go back a little bit before we get into the kind of details of what's been happening recently. Ahmed al-Sharaa, or Mohammed Jalani, as he's called, I'm not sure if either of those are his real names. He is the interim president of Syria.
And the former leader of ISIS in Syria, was it?
Yeah, he was HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which was, I believe, an al-Qaeda splinter group that was associated with ISIS as well. So he's now the interim president. Obviously, funnily enough, he has brought democracy to Syria without having been voted in a military coup. But look, things have been looking up for al-Sharaa recently. So he met with several European leaders, including Macron in May and UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy. He has had US and UK sanctions lifted against Syria, and the UK has also pledged almost 100 million in aid to the new transitional government. Neither of these men have been fazed by his somewhat flaky past of being a head-chopping extremist who came to fame in Iraq from sending suicide car bombers into shopping centres, for example, some of his finer works. Things have been looking up. So Turkey, Qatar and Saudi Arabia have agreed to pay off Syria's debt to the World Bank, which has put the new government in a perfect position to take out more loans from international institutions and take on more foreign debt. Some analysts have argued this was kind of one of the whole purposes behind ousting of the Assad government, is that Syria had very low foreign debt and refused to open up their markets for complete rape and pillage by the transnational capitalist system.
A lot of their resources were still nationally owned, weren't they?
They were, correct, and they also had food sovereignty and pharmaceutical sovereignty, which are big things. So despite indirect Israeli aggression against Syrian territory, in which most of their heavy military capability was bombed by Israel, all their weapons stockpiles, what remained of their air defences, and this is after the Israelis had assisted in putting al-Sharaa into power. There's been rumours that they've been in kind of indirect talks with the Israelis to further, promote efforts and rebuild the infrastructure of the state, which isn't really existent at the moment. So look, things have been looking up. I think there's a few things that al-Sharaa has had to contend with. So I've actually come to the conclusion that he is actually not just an Islamic extremist head chopper that promotes sectarian violence. He's something worse than that, Geordie. He is a political opportunist with no actual real ideologies, and he will go from whatever ideology he needs to in order to achieve his goals. So
he's the perfect puppet.
He's the perfect puppet. So he actually originally said, there's an interview where he's come out and he said, yeah, look, I joined Al-Qaeda to get into politics. I wanted to see how you can get into politics. And now that I run a country, we have to actually run a country. We can't just be a terrorist. You have to govern for everyone. Now, to me, that statement saying you joined Al-Qaeda to learn about politics is like saying, yeah, I became friends with Jeffrey Epstein because I wanted to learn about finance. That is just an absurd, contradictory statement. But I think he is starting to see now how useful he has been in the past to overthrow Assad, and how useless he is becoming. Because now that Syria is fractured as a state, I believe the other powers in the region, primarily Israel being the main one, does not want to see a strong consolidated independent Syria. I think Turkey has a role to play as well. They want the new state to be an extension of their kind of soft power in the region also. And I think we're going to start to see these contradictions come to the forefront. And unfortunately, what happens is the Syrian people suffer. At the end of the day, they've been suffering since 2011, and unfortunately, I do not think they are going to stop suffering. So, look, the security situation is rapidly deteriorating. Mainly, religious and ethnic minorities are being targeted by, as you said, these kind of HTS government-adjacent forces that are now essentially rampaging throughout the country with impunity. So, at the beginning of the year, we had the horrible slaughter of the Alawite population in the coastal Latakia region.
Yes, we spoke about this.
We did speak about this, in which extremist forces aligned with the government essentially attacked numerous kind of Alawite villages, regions. There were reports of horrific atrocities, mass beheadings, executions. I saw footage which I couldn't substantiate, but of government forces dropping barrel bombs out of helicopters onto civilian, population areas, which is funny because that was always the accusation they levelled at Assad during his war, which is hilarious. But look, on the 22nd of June, an attacker conducted a brutal attack on the Mar Elias Greek Orthodox Church located in the Christian quarter of the old city of Damascus. This is home to some of the most historic Christian landmarks and some of the world's oldest churches. So essentially this gentleman entered firing an AK-47, killing and wounding several churchgoers before detonating an explosive device strapped to his back. It took a further 15 minutes for government security forces accompanied by the white helmets to arrive and help stabilise the situation. At least 25 people were reported killed and a further 63 injured, although that number has since grown since then. So the Christians, unlike lots of the other kind of sects in Syria, they do not have, they're dispersed throughout a large portion of the country. It's not like we've seen where the Druze populations are kind of centred in some areas and the Alawite populations are, centred in other areas. And the Christians typically don't have the same formation and the same militia groups and defence groups that some of the other kind of ethnic sects have. So it's interestingly enough, the government of al-Sharaa attributed the attack to ISIS, and they reportedly sent security forces through to ISIS strongholds in Damascus. Apparently they arrested one man who was planning further attacks on churches. However, ISIS never took responsibility, and we know that ISIS loves to take responsibility because that is their weapon. Instead, a shadowy new group named Ansar al-Sunnah claimed responsibility. They've been described as a HDS splinter group and were reportedly instrumental alongside government officials in the wave of sectarian killings that took the lives of over 1,500 Alawis in the coastal areas earlier this year. Over the last 15 years, Syria's Christian population has dropped from 2 million people to around 500,000. So that's quite sad because you're seeing this, what was quite a diverse ethnic and religious makeup, which I think has made Syria very unique, slowly getting destroyed. And we are kind of slowly seeing the degradation of what was a combined state and a combined society.
A multi-ethnic
society breaking down into these kind of sectarian strongholds where all the minorities are afraid, and so they will kind of say, well, this is the Druze area, that's the Sunni area, that's the Christian area, and you get these little kind of cantons that are broken up. In my opinion, this works in the interests of the people, like the Israelis, that want to further balkanize Syria and prevent the creation of a unified state that could pose any threat to them.
My question also, James, what does Turkey have to do with this? Because do they not support the current government of Syria?
They do.
Yes.
Turkey has supported, and Turkey has been one of the main players.
Yes.
Turkey provided arms aid, relief, support, training. I think the Turkish intelligence has been instrumental in the last 14 years, especially during the later periods where HTS and al-Sharaa were stashed away in the Idlib province, which was essentially like an al-Qaeda HTS stronghold. And the Turks were paying or assisting in paying for their soldiers, paying for their armies, their weapons, and also facilitating the transport of weapons and funding from the Gulf states, from Israel, and also facilitating the importation of new members and new recruits, especially from the kind of Turkic populations in like Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, the Uyghurs in China, Kazakhs, for example.
Yeah.
They have had quite a big network of terror, shall we say, amongst the kind of other Turkic regions of Central Asia. They've been very instrumental. However, I think that the Turkish goals and the Israeli goals and the Saudi goals, the Gulf state goals and the American goals are all different. And I think we will start to see some clashes in how that plays out in the future and how the political reality in Syria is shaped. So what has happened is the violence has continued in the city of Asuwaida, which is the capital of the Suwaida province. Days of extreme violence erupted between Druze militias after they were attacked by what has been reported as being Bedouin tribes.
Yes.
This term is incredibly ambiguous, and I noticed that everyone was repeating this term. There was no identity, even on like Middle Eastern kind of channels and stuff. They weren't really attributing any identity to these Bedouin tribes. These were just desert dwellers that just rocked up out the desert and started killing Druze. I believe, like, these people are just government-aligned militias.
Yeah.
So they might be acting with the tacit support of some of the HTS leadership, maybe without the direct support, but they are fulfilling the role that they were recruited for, which was to wage a sectarian holy war against minorities.
Yep.
That's what drew all these people here. And I think Ahmed al-Sharaa is finally seeing that, hey, the whole, like the Pandora's box of horror that I unleashed to get to where I am is now getting out of control.
Yeah.
And I need to sort it out. And so he is coming out and looking like a moderate now, which is insane. What a twisted reality we live in. So this was followed by like almost 2 weeks of like very heavy fighting throughout the city. So we had these kind of Bedouin tribes going through and committing atrocities against Druze civilians, going to the Aswada hospital, killing all the hospital staff. We've seen men, women and children rounded up, executed, mass rapes, mass cases of women being kidnapped into sexual slavery, which we've seen in other regions as well. There's footage has emerged of Druze elders being rounded up and having their facial hair forcibly cut, which is, I believe, part of their kind of really their cultural identity.
Yes.
The HDS official government has come out and said, you know, we condemn this, and they've sent their own government, you know, sanctioned government forces into Asuwaida, in which they've kind of reportedly been trying to stabilise the situation, although they've been engaged in fighting with the Druze also. Now, in a shocking, but not really shocking turn of events, it appears the Israelis actually developed a conscience for once. So they stepped in and they said, hey, we're not going to allow you to attack the Druze populations in Asuwaida, and they've launched a massive airstrike campaign. So they started bombing Syrian government convoys headed to Asuwaida. They also bombed the presidential palace in Damascus, and they also bombed, I believe, the Ministry of Defence headquarters.
Yep.
This is after the al-Sharaa government has licked the toes of the Israelis, shall I say. They have absolutely capitulated and handed over their security sovereignty in every possible way, and then the Israelis have come in and said, nah, we're the big dogs.
Yeah.
This is the way I see it. It's them stepping in saying, we are the big dogs in the area, and you essentially, whatever you want to do, it has to go through us, essentially. We are the people that control the outcome and the direction of the way this region is going. If you don't like it, get bent. And you are not, even though we helped you in the past, you are not indisposable to us.
They allowed a section of their land to be seceded to Israel, that Israel came and annexed, did they not?
Yes, well, they've kind of officially recognised the Israeli occupation of the Golan Heights.
Yes.
The irony being that Ahmed al-Sharaa, his moniker, al-Jalani, actually means from the Golan Heights.
Yeah.
So that's supposedly where he was born, although no one knows. He's a very shadowy figure. But they allowed the Israelis to set up more bases, further encroach into Syrian territory, control Syrian water resources. And now it seems to me that this situation with the Druze community, which is very, very tragic, the violence that's being perpetrated amongst them. There is actually quite a big Druze population here in Australia, and this has affected the population here in Australia as well. But it appears that these people are now being used as pawns by the Israelis, because the Israelis are now saying, well, these people are under our protection, and we are going to essentially have military sovereignty over this section of Syria under the auspices of protecting this population. So that's, in effect, a further secession of Syrian territory to Israel.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see this more and more, and I think that was the whole purpose.
Yeah.
That's the whole purpose of having these sectarian forces take over, is that it weakens the state, divides it up, and allows further partition. But the thing is, it's really sad. So the US stepped in, funnily enough, to prevent the situation spiraling out of control. They mediated a ceasefire, lasted about 12 hours. What's happened then, it has kind of simmered down, the situation. However, there is this kind of underlying tension still there. So it's absolutely tragic. Like Human Rights Watch reported that almost 100,000 people have been displaced just in that region the last 2 weeks alone. A lot of people. The Syrian government has cut off water and electricity and food supplies going into the Suwaida city, further exacerbating the humanitarian crisis. There is a small Druze minority in Israel, mainly in the Syrian-occupied Golan Heights. They've demanded the Israelis intervene. And there are also factions within the Druze community in Syria that want the Israeli intervention.
Yeah.
There are factions that want to integrate with the new Syria, and there's also factions that just want to be left the hell alone and return to the autonomy. The Druze leader in Syria, he's kind of the spiritual leader, Sheikh al-Hijri, and they've repeatedly come out, even against Israel stepping in and just saying, look, foreign military intervention isn't going to actually help anything. We just need a national peaceful solution. And meanwhile, in Lebanon, Druze leader and politician Walid Jumblat, former leader of the Progressive Socialist Party, has said the quiet part out loud and said that there are foreign actors using the persecution of Druze to further their geopolitical aims. I think we will have to take this into consideration. I've heard analysts literally 6 months ago say this is exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And it's played out in precisely this way. And I think, again, the end goal is to make everyone in the region as sectarian and full of hatred as the Israelis and as the fundamentalist Islamists. And that way you will never have a united region.
And have these decentralized little principalities can be played off against one another. Further, leading to further instability, further suffering for the people, a lack of development for the common people. And then I think, again, the end goal is to eventually get to Iran. So you can, if you look at a map, you can kind of see the way the Israelis would potentially project their power territorially across the south of Syria. You could look at potentially linking up with Kurdish regions in Iraq. And then once you're there, you're essentially, the north of Iraq. You get close to the Caucasus region. You've got Azerbaijan. You've got the Kurdish regions in Iran, and then you're on Iran's doorstep, and you can provide a security issue for them as well. And unfortunately, all these kind of ethnic groups and minorities are just being used as pawns on the geopolitical chessboard, with no real concern for the suffering that this creates in the future. Yeah.
So we'll continue to follow the situation. All we can hope for is just a quick resolution to this immediate situation, solidarity behind all our Druze brothers and sisters as well, and behind every single person in the region.
Well, thanks there, James. Very informative.
Sorry, it's a bit to think about.
No, it is. You raise a wealth of knowledge on this topic.
Thank you very much.
It, so we appreciate the report.
If you guys like the content, comment, subscribe. Adios.
Thanks.